Hello again friends, today we're back with another collection review video. Today's collection was sent in by Zhara Eri and is titled Unremarkable Girl's Lullaby. So let's take a look. Unfortunately, due to the climate in the world and the thing that is going on right now, I wasn't able to receive a handheld paperback copy of this book, and usually I would never accept a review request, nor do I ever read electronic manuscripts, because personally I just love the touch, the feel and the smell and the magic of holding a book. But of course, when Zara contacted me asking for a review, I couldn't possibly hold the climate against her, so of course I accepted. Also, another bit of admin before we get started. In one of my previous review videos, I had a comment suggesting that I get straight to the poetry rather than do the formatting and look at the cover beforehand, and I was totally up for that, but unfortunately I felt that for this particular video I would stick to the original format of review videos, but I will definitely give that a go the next time round. So without any further blabbering from me, let's take a look at the collection. Now, I want to start by looking at the title. Personally, I don't like the title, and that's really just down to a personal hate of mine when people sell themselves short. I absolutely hate it. I hate seeing people not have confidence in themselves. Also, unremarkable probably isn't the best word to use when you're trying to market a book of your own poems. But really, I just want to reach through the computer and give you a big hug before giving you a pointing finger and a stern telling off for selling yourself short. At first, I just thought it was a quirky hipster title and a statement, but after reading the first few poems I quickly got a very strong sense of low self-esteem, so that makes me really sad. So quickly onto the cover and blurb. I'll first read the blurb. I write, therefore I am not. Even though I wish I could be these flowery words that ooze traces of perfume and tendrils of hope from the nib of my pen. I write, therefore I am not. Even though I wish I could fully embody the one and only remarkable part of me. I'm not too sure I know what that means. I write, therefore I am not. Even though I wish I could be the... yeah. And I kind of... and that was a recurring thing for me whilst reading this collection. I wasn't quite sure what a lot of the poems mean or what they were getting at, so maybe this poetry collection is way above my intelligence level and I just didn't get it, but yeah, I'm not too sure I know what that means. As for the cover, it reminds me a lot of a Rupi Kaur poetry collection cover. It's the same sort of illustration, the same sort of font and text and lack of capitalization. The actual illustration reminds me a lot of a film that I saw a few years ago about a kid who wore a space helmet, but I can't remember what film that was called. Space Boy? No. If you know what film I'm talking about, let me know, but it reminds me of that. So let's move on to theme. I wanted to talk about the overall theme, or at least the overriding idea of the collection, which I thought was really clever. It's broken up into segments as we go through a sleepless night for the poet, and I thought that was really unique and exciting. We start at 12 minutes past 11, right through to 6:58 the next morning, with a lovely stop at the ever reliable 3 in the morning, where all our thoughts seem to come alive and there's no chance of us ever getting to sleep, which is also known as the witching hour, which is the title of that particular segment. As I say, I thought this was really a really clever way of putting a collection together, and when I first opened the book and saw the different segments, it really excited me, and I thought, this is a journey I've been on myself countless times. I can't wait to kind of see someone else's perspective of a sleepless night, where your thoughts just run away with you. In terms of individual themes that are placed in an individual poem, I didn't feel like they differentiated themselves enough between each poem. It all felt very, very similar, even between segments. It felt very much the same across the whole collection, which is 125 poems, which was a bit of a downer for me. Okay, let's quickly move on to formatting then, and I'll start with the ever-present issue that I have with almost all modern collections, and that is space, use of resources. And of course I'm well aware that I was reading an electronic manuscript, which was great in that sense, but unless the print copies are formatted completely different, once again we have micro poems taking up a whole page. Of course, by now anyone that has been following my review videos for some time will know that I take great issue with this, and I will keep fighting until this stops being the norm. But let's swiftly move on from that before you all fall asleep and get bored of me saying the same thing. Let's look at other aspects of the formatting. I really think that this collection would benefit so much from a bit of rearranging of the poems. Some of the more powerful and beautiful poems come a lot later on in the collection, at least in my opinion. And I think this is one of the things that could have been done differently, that maybe would have resulted in a different review. I personally think some of those later poems should be at the start of the collection, so that you can really grab your reader from the get-go and make that impact from the very, very start. Another thing I kind of took issue with was once again the lack of capitalization, but I will put that down to one of the overriding themes of the poetry being unremarkable. Her words, not mine at all. And maybe that's kind of why there were no big letters, because everything is sort of small and insecure. Maybe that was me trying to figure out why there was no capitals in this collection. Another thing I wanted to talk about in this collection were the titles. For some reason, and I'm seeing this a lot more in modern collections, the title comes after the poem. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm still extremely grateful to see Zhara put titles in there at all, but I really don't understand why it was at the bottom of the poem. For those of you who have seen some of my videos talking about how important the titles are, and I explain that they're a great way to introduce your reader to the poem, on page 19 this is a great example of what I'm talking about, because I didn't actually understand the poem or what the poem was saying until I read the title, and then I was like, okay, I got you. Okay, let's talk about the poetry, which is why you're all here. What I really liked about Zhara's poetry was that there was a very obvious craft to it, a very obvious attempt at crafting a melodic piece. There was always a very present melody when I was reading these poems out loud, and so for that I want to give Zhara a round of applause, so thank you for taking the time to do that. Now, some of the poems, especially just starting out, left me very confused in their simplicity, and I'm going to read some as an example so you can kind of understand what I'm saying. But also, in case I just haven't got it and it's a bit above me, you can leave a comment in the comment section telling me what you get from it. So on page 15, a poem, We Are Not Our Names. We are not the names we were given at birth by the time we waste away. Perhaps we never were in the first place. Perhaps we were never meant to be. Now, I don't understand what this poem is saying. This is why I say it's always important to know the point and the theme and to make sure you really get it across. Because for me, I'm left quite confused with what the purpose of this poem is and what it's saying. But again, maybe that's just me. Another poem that I don't quite understand is on page 17, called "What Will I Be?" and it literally says, "What will I be? What will I be?" It just feels a bit unfinished. It could be a very good poem. It could be a very good start of a poem. What will I be? What will I be? Because I'm sure we all wonder what the future holds for us. But again, talking about use of resources and poems just feeling a little unfinished, or maybe it's just so profound that it's just not registering with me. I could very well be the problem here, not the poet. And finally, talking about poems that I don't quite get, would be on page 18, called "Close Enough." My younger self asks to be modelled after happy endings, after the velvet tranquility of clear cloudless skies, after the neon lights of city nights, after the sweetness of a plump blueberry's purple juice as it runs down the length of greedy fingers. So I model her after the pale green blue of the polluted waters that burbles under tall bridges. Again, I don't quite understand enough. I kind of get the basic concept of what's going on here, but for me, the poem again doesn't feel finished, because I want to know why you're modelling yourself after pale green blue polluted water. I think that should be explained in another stanza, or it just felt a bit out of the blue. No pun intended. Green blue of the polluted water. But that's just my opinion. Again, it just felt a bit of a random metaphor, and I would like to have seen the poem explain why her younger self asks to be modelled after all these great and beautiful things and seductive things, and yet you ignore that and model yourself after polluted water. I want to know why you're actively choosing to ignore your younger self, if that makes sense. Hopefully. Another critique I would have is probably that too many of the poems feel the same and discuss the same thing and have the same theme. And there's a couple of poems, one after the other, that uses the same repetition technique. The last line or the last two lines are basically solidifying a thought. For example, the first one that I just happened to pull out is page 21, "The hate creeps in." The last three lines are, "And when we open our homes up to thin stale air, the hate creeps in, the hate creeps in." And that's used quite a lot. I think it's used too soon after each poem. I'm not being very literate at all right now. But say you have 3 poems, 2 out of those 3 poems would use that technique. So in the end, by the time you've read it for the 4th, 5th time, you it's not as impactful as it is when you first read it, or you come across the first poem that uses it. Gosh, what is wrong with me today? For me, I can see that a lot of time and effort and craft has gone into these poems, and I am so thankful for that, because I receive lots of poetry from people that don't put in that effort. So you're already way ahead of certain people, but for me, there's just something missing from them, and I can't quite put my finger on what it is. There's just a lot of poems that I read that I feel didn't quite cross the line. They were on the way up and on the way to the finishing line, but didn't quite get there. And you have to remember that could purely be down to my own personal tastes. Don't forget, poetry and all art is subjective, and what I walk away from reading this collection, I'm almost certain that anyone that reads this who is the actual target audience, I don't feel that I was the target audience for this particular collection, but anyone that is will walk away with a completely different opinion. And on that note, my final critique of the actual poetry itself would be that the metaphors felt a little odd at times, and other times they felt cliche, sometimes forced, and probably the most overriding feeling that I got from the metaphors were a lot of the time they felt really, really random, and just kind of came out of nowhere. I haven't actually made a note of what poem this is, but off the top of my head I remember one that really kind of stood out as random was describing a lover like chocolate chips on cookies, and that kind of just didn't sit, it just stood out too much for me. Also, unfortunately, the same thing can be said for some of the titles of the poems too. In all honesty, for me, and I hate saying this, I hate that I have to put this video out, but for me, I struggled to get through this collection. For me, I feel like this would have been a much more impactful read if it had been condensed and made into a chapbook of just the more powerful poems that I read. Page 33, free as a bird in a cage with a door. I hadn't lived before I met you, but God, at least it was freer than this. And I think that's a really great micro poem. I really like it, but I definitely would like to see the poet expand on this now, because that's where my tastes lie now. They've matured, but I'm not taking anything away from this. I think that's a great micro poem. And if you wrote something a bit more expanded and used that as the last 2 lines, I think that would be amazing. It's definitely a thought-provoking 2 lines, but I really want to know more about the poet's experience with this. I want to be able to say, yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. I know exactly how you feel. I'm on your level. Tell me more, you know? I see massive potential here. Really, I do. And I do wonder if the problem lies in Zhara's own mindset, describing herself as unremarkable. As I said at the top of this video, it's not the best way to describe yourself or your poems from an unremarkable person, because that sets that already sets a tone in the reader's mind. Or, in all honesty, I very well could be the problem here. I've read so many modern collections now that they all sort of just blur into one, and that's where the modern poet has to really be careful, because it becomes so hard to differentiate between each different poet and their voices. And I absolutely applaud Zhara for putting a collection together of 125 poems. That is a massive, massive achievement, so well done. And from one poet to another and one human to another, I really hope that she finds the confidence in herself and is able to raise that self-esteem, because it is really sad, and I really hope that you continue to push forward and keep pushing your work forward, and to really develop her voice and what makes her unique, not unremarkable. As I say, I'm absolutely gutted that I couldn't enjoy this read more, but I'm certain that there are people out there that will love this book. It just wasn't for me. It just wasn't my style, I'm afraid. As someone who's been on this poetry journey for a while now, and is still very much trying to find his own way, as I'm sure we all will be doing for the rest of our lives, because that is the pursuit of beautiful art, I know how much it takes to keep up that momentum and motivation. And I really want to make it clear that I am absolutely rooting for Zhara. I really do see potential here. This is a very solid first stepping stone for the poet to launch from. And that's it for this week. I'm going to go and eat some comfort food now, because I genuinely hate putting reviews like this out there. Before I go though, as always, I'm going to leave you with a reading of my favourite poem from the collection, which I think is really beautiful. Have a great week everyone, and I'll see you in the next video. Who looks after the moon? He told me I reminded him of my mother, the moon, and it didn't sound like a compliment. So I said, "Oh, well, why?" "You see, the sun shines on every ugly part of us, our faces, our faults, our fears, whether we want it to or not," he said. "But the moon, she asks for nothing and expects nothing. She shoos away the sun, then drenches the sky in onyx, and dotes on us as we fall asleep." Offended for Artemis, I asked him why he sounded disappointed, but he only shook his head. "I guess this is my way of asking if anyone looks after you," he said, "since no one looks after the moon."